So before I start, just pray that God resonates these words from the Bible with your hearts. Passage is 1 Corinthians 7:17 through 22. Nevertheless, each one should retain for the place in life that the Lord assigned to him, and to which God has called him. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised, and he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man he should not be uncircumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keeping God's commands is what counts. Each one should remain in the situation which he was in when God called him. Were you a slave when you were called? Don't let it trouble you, although if you can gain your freedom, do so. For he who is a slave, when he was called by the Lord, is the Lord's freed man. Similarly, he who was a free man, which he was called in Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brothers, each man, as responsible to God, should remain in the situation God called him to.
Okay, before I start, a couple of really quick things. Just want to clarify. I am a really organized person, and I love documents. So I'm going to do this with a slide. So give me 1 second. That's a fun noise. Woo! That was worse than a joke. Okay. The other thing is, we're already running a little behind schedule. I'm probably going to go even longer. So I'm going to need grace from Tula and Maurizio in my time here. And I'll just let the Spirit lead, like you said, Tula. So if I go long, it's the Spirit's fault. It's not actually my fault. But yeah, I'm going to pray and we can start. I'm excited to get into this passage. So yeah, Lord, I just want to thank you for the words that we were just speaking here. Singing together as a community. Pray that, you would just give me the words as well as we continue our worship. Speak through me, Lord. Take away any bit of anxiety I might be tempted to feel this time. To just know that it is not my preaching or my ministry this time. That it is you that is going to be speaking to us and to me and through me. Your words, your conviction in this passage in 1 Corinthians 7, that if there's any conviction, if there's any encouragement, Lord, that it is your words that are speaking into that. So I pray in your Son's name. Okay, I'm just going to dig right into it. 1 Corinthians 7. So first I want to talk a little bit about, I think it's important before we get into the passage, to know a little bit of context about Corinth. It's really interesting and really informative to know the Corinthian culture and the church so that we can further understand this passage. And I'll explain why maybe I chose this passage, why I think it's relevant as we go on. So first, we're going to talk about Corinth. Can you guys hear me okay, by the way? So Corinth, the Corinthian culture, so we know they're a trading hub at the time. They're kind of, you can see located in Greece. The picture on the right, there's like this peninsula, and Corinth is right in this little strip of land where there's the sea on both sides of it. Okay, what this might seem irrelevant, I think it's actually really relevant because there are sailors that could go all the way around the peninsula and take an extra few days Corinth said is that he usually just traveled to Corinth, park their ship wherever, spend a night in Corinth, go to the other side, and rent the ship so that they can get to their location on the other side. And then later they would come back and spend another day and get their ship and go back home. This was very common in that time. This means that there were a lot of travelers, there were a lot of foreigners constantly traveling through Corinth and affecting their culture. I think we can all relate to this in some way living in Florence, because there are constantly travelers and foreigners living in Florence. And they affect the culture, they affect the way we live, the way we interpret things, they affect the art. So much of life, and so we can relate to this and see this in Corinth and the people there. So they're a trading hub there. This also means that they're making a lot of money. What we know about their religion, we know that Christianity has not experienced its boom yet. It's still very early on as Paul was writing these letters, so this is one church maybe in Corinth that we know of. But they're mostly, it's paganism, it's Hellenism, it's idol sacrifice. We also know that this leads into a lot of different, one of the things that it leads into is a lot of different sex practices. We know that Corinth was really affected by the Roman world in a lot of ways, because Rome basically owned the world at this point. A couple of us are learning that in some of our classes because we learn a lot about Rome. So I'm learning a lot of these things, even as I study here, that Rome was a culture that really actually didn't believe in heterosexuality, which is, I think, really weird probably for a lot of us to think about. Because for them, the male status was so much greater than the female status. That if you were a male especially, and you weren't, if you strictly were with women, that was kind of weird. You were kind of socially outcasted. It was weird to not be in homosexual relationships, or at least to be bisexual. And we see that in the Emperor Hadrian too, which is really interesting. But I'm not going to go into that because that's important. But we know, this again is important to know at least, that their sexual practices are radically different from what we know, from what the Bible preaches. And then we know the economy. Like I said, they're experiencing this trading hub. They're kind of coming out of a depression too. So currently though, as Paul's writing this letter to this Corinthian church, they're experiencing this economic boom because they're trading hub, the money is increasing, there's a lot of wealth in the city, and because of that there's also a lot of new buildings being built, a lot of new architecture. I'm an architect major, this excites me a little bit. This also means though that for those that are wealthy who can afford to commission these buildings, that you put your name on that building when you commission it. And when you put your name on a building, you kind of build your social status. So what we see in all these different things, the trading hub, their religious beliefs, their sex practices, and then their focus on economy, you kind of see this common thread and theme. It's really all about you. It's a very individualistic society. From those of us that are from America, or even I think Europe at some point, we really understand this individualistic mindset. Takemi, it's interesting, as you're seeing later, from Japan. I spent a little bit of time in Japan. I think they're actually the opposite, very holistic mindset. This culture, very individualistic. It's very all about me. How can I get my name to be praised? And one thing also I didn't mention is that I said that people are getting their names on buildings, and so they're getting this status being raised. But if you can't afford to get buildings built, then it's just the next thing. It's who are you working for? Is the person that you're working for that's above you getting their name on buildings? So then your identity is in the person above you. But it's still all about you. It's all about what you can do, and your identity is the most important thing. So these are just a couple of background things to know about the city of Corinth. We'll talk about the letter that Paul writes to these Corinthians. So, two themes I want to cover really briefly. We're going to talk about the chapter. One theme that I think Paul hits again and again and again, as I'm mentioning here in this letter, is identity. It's kind of two areas that he hits on. One is this cultural peer pressure, which I've been hinting at. They have a lot of people constantly flooding in. They have a lot of sin in their city, and for them, the temptation is to just flow right back into the way their city is acting, to let it affect their lives a little bit too much. We see that throughout the letter. They're tempted to live for social status. Just like the Corinthians, a lot of the people in the church are not rich people, so they're tempted to put their identity in the people above them. Paul says, some of you say I follow Apollos, or Paul, or Cephas, or Jesus. He says we need to all follow Jesus. There's only one person we can follow, not the person who's teaching us, but Jesus. Okay? So we see the temptation to flow into society. I think, again, we can relate to these temptations in our own life. And the other thing he talks about with identity is that I think because they're living in a city, which I would compare, maybe for those of us who are from America, to Las Vegas, the Sin City, or maybe from Europe, maybe Amsterdam. I don't know if that's a fair comparison. But we kind of, Corinth was known in that time to be a sinful city. People had sayings about Corinth. And we know this from different writings that they were just known for their sex practices in their crazy ways. And we know that the church itself, similarly, was known for its sin. We don't see really any other letters from Paul that are so full of descriptions of how sinful their churches were. It was a very sinful church. So the temptation, again, is to put their identity in being sinners. We are sinners, but we're Christians, so we're just going to keep receiving grace and accept we're sinners and just keep sinning, because Christ will just keep giving us grace, right? But Paul is saying, no, your identity is not that you're sinners, you're actually sinners who sometimes sin. And this is really important, again, for to understand his letter, this chapter, is they find that they're losing hope in their sanctification. But Paul says you can't lose hope. And he talks about the resurrection, he talks about all these things, so we need to understand there's identity issues that Paul's reminding us. And then the next one is unity. I think this is the overarching theme that we see more than anything in this letter. Unity, in that it's the largest problem I think they have in their church, but it's not just the problem, it's the solution to all their problems. Paul's calling them back again and again and again. Unity, you need to be a unified church. You are one body, just as there's one bread broken, just as there's one cup that we drink of, there's one body, and you are that body. So do not separate from each other. Excuse me. This is in a few different ways. I'll just mention briefly. So in worship, we see that they're worshiping, not worshiping for themselves and what they can gain. It talks about speaking in tongues. It talks about a few different things and how it's all about your personal worship, not about serving the community in a whole. It talks about who they follow. Like I just mentioned, Paul, Apollos, Cephas. They're divided in who they follow. It talks about their disagreements. They were, rather than harmony and peace within the church, they're suing each other within their own church. Not setting a good example. When they expel, I think I spelled that right. He's calling them to expel their moral brother because there's a man in the church who is sleeping with his mother-in-law, and we know that this is common in that culture. But there are people in the church that are encouraging him to do this. He said, you can't do that. If you're going to see unity in your church and peace in your church, sometimes you need to get rid of that sin. And actually, if you want his sanctification and his salvation, sometimes it would be better for him to be taken out of the church. So we're seeking unity in every way we can. We want to harm, we want to expel people. And then finally, he says in the Lord's Supper as well, another example. Like I said, with one bread, one cup. There are people that are eating and taking all the food before people that are hungry can even get food in the church. So they're not serving the whole, they're not serving the church. They're just hoarding all the food for themselves. Sometimes it's saying, no, it's about the unity of your church. And then finally, as well, unity, we see this calling to humility, as I've kind of mentioned in these other points. He's calling them to be humble the way that they love the church, to seek the whole of the part we set against this individualistic society. Like I said, it speaks volumes to the culture when we seek humility and the whole over the individual. Because Corinth as a city did not understand that concept. And to seek that in the church would speak volumes to this culture. And finally, he mentions at the beginning, and all these points and themes that he's getting at, that if we're going to understand them, we have to first understand, as he mentions in the first chapter, that God's wisdom is the world's foolishness. If we're going to grasp this Christianity thing, his wisdom is the world's foolishness. And again, we see this in the cultures that we live in. Okay, so now we're going to get into, we know these things, how does this relate to chapter 7? So we're going to break down chapter 7. So I think chapter 7, what I want to get us to get out of it, we know that there's 11 paragraphs in this chapter. There are 5 points that I want to cover quickly. And then there's one theme that assists, and we can see unity and identity throughout this. But there's one unique theme to this chapter that I think has, this is the reason I chose this chapter, it's something that I see so commonly when I ask people, what do you need prayer for? Even back home, I hear this theme continually coming up. I see it in my life, my roommate's life, so many people's lives. It's going to sound like common to some of my friends here. But I think it's a really important theme, and that's why I really love this chapter. I think it's really applicable to us. So point number 1, okay, Paul gets to these first couple of paragraphs. He says, singleness is good. This paragraph is relates to singleness in marriage, and he talks a lot about it. So point number 1, he says, singleness is good. Why is it good? Well, first, when he's talking about singleness, he actually points to marriage. He says, you know what, marriage is a freaking commitment. He says it's not to be taken lightly. So it's a lifelong commitment, and it's also not for ourselves. It's not to be, it's not an individualistic thing. It's not to fill ourselves. It's a self-giving thing. It's a humble thing. It's really difficult. So I think it's interesting that as he promotes singleness, his first point is to say, marriage is actually really hard. For those of you that think it's easy, that think it's all by yourself, it's actually not. And then he says, but if you can't control yourself, okay, you get married. If you have this self-control, I'm not saying it's a sin to marry, but I urge you with the situation you're in, I think it would be good to control yourselves and to learn that singleness is good. And he also says, again, and keep coming back to this culture thing, it would speak volumes to your culture if you were to stay single and to stay. Because singleness means that you're living purity. Because if you're single and you're not married, in the church's context, it means you're not having sex. And that is crazy in the Corinthian culture. So he's saying it would speak volumes if you decided to commit to singleness in this culture. That's point number 1. Singleness is good. Okay. We're going to start seeing why he says these things. Point number 2, divorce is bad. Why is divorce bad? One thing I want to say is that throughout this whole chapter, a lot of the things Paul's going to say are suggestions. It's really, he says that, he says, not I, but the Lord. Sorry, here's what he says. Typically he says, not the Lord, but I. So he's just saying, this is my suggestion. This is just, I'm just trying to help you. Here, this is the one time he says, not the Lord. He says, the Lord's command, divorce is actually a sin. It's something you can't do. So for that reason, 1, divorce is bad. 2, he adds again, okay, it's just my suggestion as well. He keeps adding, there's all these suggestions in this chapter. And so he says, it's my suggestion that you don't divorce, because for those of you that are Christians in this church, or maybe you have a spouse that's not a Christian, and you want to get out of that, you want to seek your own sanctification, and starts to become about you, he's saying that you're missing out. If you divorce them, you're missing out on an opportunity to seek your spouse's holiness. Because you're spreading the gospel into their life continually just by your own sanctification. The way that you live out Christianity, they're witnessing that in a way that they would not if you just divorced them, if you just broke it off. Saying the same thing with the kids too. If you have children, they're missing out on that opportunity if you just divorce and give them away. So there's an opportunity even in the midst of where you're at. If you just stay married, even if it's a hard marriage, just stay married for that reason. And then kind of this sub-point he brings in there. He says also just seek peace though. If your spouse really wants divorce, and you try to bring unity, to not divorce them, but they just really want to divorce you, saying, okay, just seek peace with them and let them have that. And also understand, so seek unity, and also understand that we do not save. That Jesus is the only one that can truly save people, and it's not our job. So if they really are seeking divorce, let that happen. It's kind of a sub-point, but I think it's important that he makes as well. And then I'm going to skip. So that's the first going to skip points 3 and 4. We're going to come back to them. We're going to point number 5. So we have singleness is good, divorce is bad. And point number 5 is singleness is great. So now he actually starts talking about not just marriage and how to commit. He starts talking about, wow, singleness is really great. It's a really good thing. So he says, why singleness is great? Because you have undivided power. Your attention is undivided when you're single, when you're not married. Because, again, it's not a sin to get married. He talks about Ephesians. It's a really a beautiful thing. It's a really beautiful picture of what Christ's marriage is with the church. But the reality is, our hearts, our attention are divided when we're married. We're not fully focused on the Lord. We're focused also on the things of this world and the person and the spouse that we're married to. So he's saying there are opportunities. There are merely just opportunities that you can take advantage of as a single person. You maybe just can't do always as a married person. So he's encouraging them to undivided attention as a single person. Again, we come back to culture. It speaks to the culture. He mentions this point multiple times. And then finally he says, he actually uses the word better here. And I think this is where I also find this chapter confusing sometimes, or it did. So I think it's important to clarify some of the more confusing points. Why would Paul actually use the word better here? Is it promoting singleness as this overarching better thing? I can just be a more holy person if I'm single as opposed to those married people? I don't think that's what Paul is saying. But I think in light of what we've been talking about, that it speaks to the culture, that it's a really difficult thing for them to stay pure in this culture, that for this church, for this Corinthian church, for some of these people that he has in mind, that he's met and talked to, that it would be better. It would be better for their souls and their ministry to commit to singleness, even if it's for a short time, to commit to singleness. And again, it's not a command. It's not a sin. He even says that. He says, I would encourage you. I think it might be better for some of you to stay single. Okay, now we're going to go back to the last couple points, kind of the theme of what we'll get out of this chapter. So point number 3 is contentment. And this is, we get this from the chapter, or sorry, from the paragraph that Alex read for us. Right in the middle of this chapter. And it's the only paragraph that does not talk about marriage or singleness or relationships at all. It's the only paragraph that doesn't mention these relationships. So I think we would typically read that and think, okay, this idea that he's talking about in this paragraph about contentment, it's kind of a supporting theme probably, I guess, to this greater theme of singleness. Paul's promoting singleness and not divorcing. And contentment is just kind of this supporter to that greater theme. But I think maybe it's not super important how we interpret, but I think in light of what I want us to get in this chapter tonight, I think it's actually the other way around. I think even though his other 10 paragraphs are about singleness and not divorcing, I think they're actually subpoints to this greater theme, this calling to live in contentment. And as Paul says, to remain in the situation you are at right now, to attain the place. He mentions, I said that I think it was specific, his calling to singleness, and that it's better to that church. But in here in this paragraph, when he says that each one should retain the place in life the Lord has assigned them to, he says that that's a rule he lays down for all the churches. I think that means us today too. Paul says this is a calling, not just for Corinth. This is a very general calling for all of us, even here, us today. We are called to retain our place in life. So what does that mean? He uses the example of circumcision. Circumcision, I think, is probably not something we talk about too often, and probably something we're not super familiar with. How often do you guys talk about circumcision among your group of friends? I do not talk about it very often. So I think it's hard sometimes understanding passages like this, where again, we need to know a lot of culture and context. So I'm going to fill us in briefly. What is Paul talking about when he mentions circumcision? And he says, whether you're circumcised or you're not circumcised, it doesn't matter. Just stay where you're at. Because I think it's interesting to note that the Roman baths were a very popular thing in that day. There were thousands of them. Rome baths in every city that Rome conquered, which was the whole Mediterranean world at this point. And we know that Judaism was still not a very popular thing. Paganism ruled Rome. And so if you were Jewish, you were circumcised, unlike everybody else. And if you went to the Roman baths, naked as they all were, they would see your circumcision. It was really embarrassing. You were socially outcast as a circumcised Jew. So there were actually people that were so self-conscious about that, they would hide, they would go through a painful surgery to hide their circumcision, just so that they weren't judged and viewed as weird. And this is because they're an image-conscious culture, and we can relate to this. We know what it's like, I think, to be an image-conscious culture. I won't mention names, but one of my roommates at the beginning of our semester here at Schwartz, see, I'm the type of guy, first of all, that I love to wear shorts all the time, and not today, which is really weird, but I usually wear shorts all the time as soon as it's above freezing. And when I spent the summer in Japan, they don't really wear shorts, the guys there, but I didn't care, because I like wearing shorts, so I don't care what they think. Or when I came here, it's kind of similar. Not too many men wear shorts a lot, but whatever. One of my roommates, though, I remember him saying, I would not wear shorts because I'm just afraid of what the foreign people are going to think of me. I don't want them to judge me for wearing shorts. I just want to fit in. And I don't think that's wrong, but again, we're an image-conscious culture. We think about these things just like the Corinthians did. And then slavery as well. It tells the slaves, if you have an opportunity to get free, take it. Don't make that your main goal. Attain the place in life that you are in and remain right where you are. Embrace it. And then he brings it back into the next paragraph, right back to relationships. This whole thing he's been talking about, kind of summarizing that. If you're single, stay single. If you're married, don't divorce. Stay married. Retain the place that you have right now. And then we move on to point number 4. Okay, we're going to keep this theme of contentment though. Continue to think about it. But this next point that he gets into right after that is he starts to say, hold on to nothing. This is, I think, one of the most confusing paragraphs in this chapter, because he actually says, from now on, those of you who have lives, live as if you had none. As if those who mourn as if you did not, those who are happy as if you are not. I think that could be really confusing. Here's what I think he's not saying. I don't think he's saying if you're married, get divorced, because he just said the opposite. I don't think he's saying if you're happy, just be miserable, because that's the Christian life. I don't think that's what he's saying. But here's what I think he is saying, and this is what we're going to finish with. I'm going to be asking some questions. I'm just kind of finishing this sermon with some ideas, some more general ideas of what Paul's getting at in this chapter. So my question is this. When you lay in bed at night, do you ever think through the day tomorrow as you're trying to fall asleep? But does it keep you up? Does it keep you up thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow? Maybe all this laundry list of things that you have to do. God says, don't worry in Matthew 6. He says, tomorrow has enough worries of its own, so why do we do that? I think I want to remind us here tonight that God has you exactly where you are. As you are, for a reason. Proverbs 16:9 says that in his heart man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. The Lord determines our steps. He is in control. It doesn't matter how much we plan. If you are in the Lord, if you have